Hello, everyone. I thought I would just go over the first Mill review questions briefly. Number one, in the first paragraph of chapter one, Mill expresses surprise at how little progress has been made in the past 2,000 years in answering what question? Well, the question is, what is the criterion of right and wrong? That is, how is it that we should go about determining what makes an action right and what makes it wrong? Um, yeah, or you could put into what is the foundation of morality in that sense of if we know what the foundation of morality is or the first principles of morality, then we would be able to judge correctly and reliably particular actions with regard to their moral value. So really, what he's looking for and what he says that mankind is still looking for is the criterion of right and wrong. That is the basis of right and wrong. In the second paragraph, Mill states that it is more important to discover the first principles of a practical art like morals or legislation than a theoretical one like algebra. Why? Well, the first principles are the theoretical foundations, right? The absolute most basic assumptions, first principles upon which any science actually is founded. And a theoretical one like algebra presumably has first principles, that is, starting points, things that need to be taken for granted or accepted in order to build the science. But that is not so important in something like algebra, where the first principles, at least in Mill's time, were still a matter of great controversy. In order to do algebra, that is, for a speculative or theoretical science, as opposed to a practical one, it's really not all that important to know or to be sure about the first principles. But in a practical art like morals or legislation, he says it's different. You can't make a first step in those things until you know what the foundation is, because you need to know what to aim for. In a practical art, we're trying to achieve something. We're trying to reach a goal. And without knowing the first principles, or be, at least making decisions about what the first principles are, then we don't know what to aim for. Say that we decide that the first principle of morality is something like the first categorical imperative, right? That my actions must be universalizable. Then I have something that I am shooting for. And whatever I do, my purpose is to make my rule of action something that's capable of being a universal law for everyone. And that's what I have in mind. Think about alternatively, if I'm a utilitarian, and I believe that the first principle of morality is that you should do that which increases the general happiness, then I have a different thing that I'm shooting for. So the idea is that in a practical art like morality, I need to know what my goal should be, and that will be determined by my first principles. Number three, in the third paragraph, Mill says that almost everyone agrees that morality is founded on general principles or laws, and that, quote, the morality of an individual action is the application of a law to an individual case. What does it mean to say that those laws are determined a priori by intuition, or that they are discovered through experience a posteriori? Well, the idea of the a priori is that there are certain, let's say, native ideas or innate ideas that we have that are always there, like a moral sense. So to say that the laws of morality are a priori is to say that they're built into the human mind. Let's say that that we simply know them. But to say that they're discovered through experience a posteriori is to say that they're discovered through experience. That is, we learn what they are through our experience. The idea of an a priori or a priori knowledge is that it comes before experience. It's always there. We don't learn it from experience. where obviously to say that something is a posteriori is to say that we learn it through experience. So I think that Mill is ultimately going to say that the fundamental laws of morality are discovered a posteriori through experience. In the fourth paragraph, Mill claims that although there has been no agreement about an ultimate standard of morality, such a standard has been implicitly accepted by all and has shaped moral opinion. And what is that standard? It is the greatest happiness principle, or principle of utility, that is. His idea is that even though there has been, as he says, there's been no consensus, little progress is made in answering the question, he thinks that implicitly, without maybe even people acknowledging it, that the greatest happiness principle, the idea that everything that we do should promote human happiness, and that it is that which makes an action right and the reverse of it which makes it wrong, has been implicitly accepted by all for all these years. And that's why I think it's the true criterion or ultimate standard of morality. 5, according to Mill in the fifth paragraph, why is it impossible to prove an ultimate moral standard? It's just a lot. This is really a logical point. That's not just about morality, but about any theoretical study, or what we might call generally a science, is that its first principles have to be assumed. And this is the idea in logic that no deductive science, no theoretical activity can prove its own first principles, that there have to be starting points. And that's because if you said that all first principles need to be proved, then you would be involved in an infinite regress. That is, the first principles simply have to be assumed because they are the things by which we prove everything else. So ultimately, he cannot prove the greatest happiness principle, or the principle of utility. Same thing, because it's a first principle. It's something that needs to be assumed, but that's true of every morality or every moral theory or every theoretical endeavor like science or mathematics. Number 6, what is the greatest happiness principle? The greatest happiness principle is an action is right insofar as it tends to promote happiness, wrong insofar as it promotes the reverse of happiness. In what sense is it an answer to the basic question of Chapter 1? The basic question of Chapter 1 is, what is the criterion for morality? And he answers it for himself. The criterion, the ultimate standard by which we judge the morality of actions, is the greatest happiness principle. Number 7, according to Mill, what is happiness? What is unhappiness? Happiness is pleasure, unhappiness is pain. And this is what makes utilitarianism a hedonism, is that ultimately it's saying that pleasure is the good, and we can say that that pain is what constitutes evil. So this is important to understand the idea of hedonism and the way that utilitarianism is a form of hedonism. And this is, by him saying that that pleasure is happiness, that's what leads to this long defense of utilitarianism against the claim that saying that human happiness is constituted by pleasure is degrading to human nature, that it puts us in the level of animals. Mill's whole point in the, we would rather be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied, is part of his defense of that, and saying that we have higher pleasures. And we would never be content with a fully satisfied array of pig's pleasures. We need human pleasures, which are, include the so-called higher pleasures. According to number 8, according to Mill, why does quality as well as quantity of pleasure need to be taken into account? Again, because the pleasures of a human being differ in quality from the pleasures of another sort of being, like an animal, like a pig. A lot of bad things said about pigs. Pigs are fine, but the idea is that what would satisfy the kind of pleasures that would satisfy a pig are different from the kind of pleasures that would satisfy a human being. The quality, we could have, a tremendous quantity of piggy pleasures, but that wouldn't be enough because there are qualitatively different pleasures that a human being requires. Number 9, how can we determine the difference between higher and lower pleasures? And what argument is there that the higher ones are more valuable than the lower ones? Well, how can we determine the difference between higher and lower pleasures? That's a really good question. I'm not 100% sure that Mill ever really answers it. Roughly speaking, the higher pleasures are the pleasures that are available to a human being because of their intellect, freedom, and will. That there are certain pleasures of life that require human reason, a human mind, and the kind of social life that human beings are capable of. Whereas the lower pleasures are really the pleasures of the body, the pleasures that an animal can share in. Now, what argument is there that the higher ones are more valuable than the lower ones? This comes down to preference, right? The idea is that they're more valuable or more desirable. And the way that Mill thinks you can prove that is if you ask people who have experienced both. That is, if you ask anyone who's experienced the so-called higher pleasures of the intellect, social life, feeling, art, all the things he has in mind, which are basically the things having to do with culture, they've also, of course, just being human beings, have experienced the lower pleasures of the body too. And if you ask them which one they prefer, which one they consider more valuable or more intrinsically pleasing, he says they will invariably choose the higher pleasures. So the proof is in what people who have experienced both prefer.